Hello, and welcome to the first of 5 parts of my Gen Con 2021 Summoner Wars experience. My name is Ryan Shibata, aka Shibata. In this video, I'll be going over the Gen Con experience, the format, the way the tournament worked. I'll be going over some statistics I compiled from both the tournament and the Summoner Wars League, talking about faction viability. And then I'll briefly go into who I am and what makes me connected to this game and why I'm going to make videos for it in the future. Without any further ado, let's get to the first part of that, the Gen Con experience. Here we have tournament data. This is the screen for the Gen Con tournament. It was an online tournament held mid-September, officially by Plaid Hat Games, who were the developers and are the developers of this board game. Anybody was welcome to join. They could pick 5 of these 8 factions that have been released, and then they would play in round robins. The first pool had, I think, like 90 something players, and it would be made of these groups of 6 randomly assigned, and to be randomly assigned matches with a little bit of mathematical tinkering to make sure there's no mirror matches and to make sure you face each person once. I was here in pool 10, the most notable player being Fist, also H37. This is the 5th ranked guy in the Summoner Wars League and tied for 20th. And then me as Shibata, Seaboil Photo, and Bisexual Octopus are newcomers. And we had to buy. A lot of these pools only had 5 people. So out of the ones in the first round, if you placed in the top 2, you got to move on to the second round. So Fist and H37 both moved on here. They're 5-0 and 4-1. The rest of us were 2-3, which was really 1-3 because of the bye round. And then after all these pools, you can see there were 18 in total. We move on to round 2. And here only 1 person moves on to the final pool. So it was really competitive. Our old friends, H37, did respectable, 2-3, but didn't make it out. Instead, it was Sildenethel winning the tiebreaker against Snog. And then Fist. No, this is the final. Fist is right here, 4-1, winning relatively comfortably above Lazit in pool 6. And then the final match had Fizz in this 4-way tie against against Phosmonot, level 3 CPU, and Lark. Lark winning the tiebreaker to win the overall competition, and props to them. The tiebreaker system was really complicated. There were a bunch of like tiebreakers for tiebreakers for tiebreakers, but the one that came down here was the relevant ones were first win-loss and then head-to-head. And then if you had something complicated like this 4-way tie, you would look at your isolated strength of schedule. So beating people who are good counts for more, beating people who also did well. So that eliminated Phosma and level 3 CPU. And then Lark had the head-to-head win over Fizz here. I didn't do that well in this tournament. I went 1-3. And I've already covered, even though it said it was part 2 of 5, it was the first one I recorded. I already covered my match against Fizz in a previous video on this channel, which you are welcome to watch. And then future videos will be coming when I have time to make them. This tournament was pretty interesting. The first 2 rounds, you only had 1 day because they had to do this entire tournament in 1 week for the Gen Con week, the Gen Con experience. It's this big board game convention. And while Plaid Hat Games didn't attend it in person because of COVID concerns, they held this online tournament, which was great for people like me who couldn't have attended the convention in the first place. What's notable in here is the factions people chose. I actually prepared some charts. Here we go. And these represent the factions that people chose. I've plotted them on the number of people, the number of games played with them, which is roughly consistent with the number of people who chose it, with just a little bit of randomness for the factions that got skipped because of the bye weeks, the bye matches. And then here we have win rate from 35% to 65%. And we can see at the ending of the first round, which is the round that everyone was able to participate in, no sample bias in that respect. That the most popular factions were the Savanna Elves, the Phoenix Elves, the Polar Dwarves, and they all did pretty respectably, a little bit north of 50%. The Breakers did fantastically, Tundra Orcs not so much, and the Fallen Kingdom and Cave Goblins struggled. Almost nobody picked the Vanguards, but the Vanguards still did almost 55% win rate, definitely like north of 50, although that was in part due to a very, very small sample size. I thought this was really interesting because you would think that decks like the Savanna Elves and the Polar Dwarves, which are considered to be the strongest decks in this series, in this game, would be doing better, but it was the relatively unknown, untested Breakers who just surged to a 60+ win rate. And I don't think anyone expected the Tundra Orcs to do this badly. There were some concerns that they lacked the finesse or the escape options or the defensive play, the mix-ups that decks like the Phoenix Elves have, that the Savanna Elves have, but they really struggled. It was theorized that a lot of this is because of the mistakes that you can see in my game against Fizz, which is newer players overcommitting, going in hard, and losing as a result. But if that was true, you would think they would benefit. They would go back up from the first round to the second and third round. And we can see when we compare the two rates here, from the first round only to all rounds, the Tundra Orcs barely move up. They get about 15 extra games in, but they only move up a little bit in the win rate. Compare that to the biggest jump, the Cave Goblins go from south of 45% to a positive win rate, in fact the third highest in the entire game, behind only the Breakers and the Phoenix Elves. And I think this is a really interesting comparison to make if I just flip back and forth between these two graphs, is to see how the factions did when the cream of the crop was weeded out from the rest of us. What factions were like hard to master but really rewarded a skilled player? And we can see the two factions that went up, other than the Tundra Orcs who barely went up, are the Cave Goblins and the Phoenix Elves. So I feel like if you're looking for like a hard to master deck, a deck to really sink your teeth into, to learn a lot about, those are some good choices. I think that's one conclusion we can draw. Some other conclusions: the Breakers went down a little bit, the Vanguards went down a little bit. But it was really interesting to see the Phoenix Elves surge ahead. For reasons I'll explain later, I thought that they were overrated because in the Summoner Wars League, which we'll be taking a look at later, they drew into matchups against the Vanguards and Tundra Orcs, but they did really well in this general purpose setting as well. Anyway, this is all interesting. It shows some results, but there's something else that I'd like to talk about, which is the Summoner Wars League. We can see here, Summoner Wars Zone, there's an entire league. There's third season, Snog won it. We had Donkey Glen. Here's Fish, who I was talking about earlier. Here's our De Broys, who inspired me to make these videos more than anybody else. Here's a bunch of names. Here's H37 from my pool. Really good players. Hopefully I'll be here in season 4. But it also has, just today, they opened up a faction ranking and a faction statistic. Faction ranking, we can see who's won in this league, which, if for those of you who don't know, this is a invitational league. Anybody's welcome to join. Message El Canela if you would like to on the Discord. And they're taking submissions, you'll be joining at the bottom rank like I will be, but you can move up as time goes on. 2 matches get played every week. That's my little hype up. Anyway, looking at the faction ranking here, we can see the Savanna Elves do extremely well. Polar Dwarves again, and then all the way down we have the Vanguards at a huge drop off from 41.6% to 35.2%. This is probably why very, very few people picked this deck in the Gen Con tournament. And it also might be why the win rate was so high over here, was because the only people who were playing the Vanguards were the ones who were really confident in their abilities with that deck. So what I was thinking was, I was looking at this information from the league. I was looking at this information here, and I was thinking it would be nice if we had some way to combine those to be able to get the maximum amount of data possible. So I did that. I went to Google Sheets, I just copied, data entered everything, and I got this graph, which is my favorite, I think the most important out of all of them. This is the faction win rates from both the Summoner Wars League and the Gen Con tournament. And I've compiled them and sorted them by total win rate. So this is every official-ish match that we have. And you can see that the total win rate isn't necessarily in between, like exactly in between the league win rate and the Gen Con win rate. That's because it goes for the total size, not the average of the two. So for here, Vanguards, the Vanguard's total win rate is much closer to the league win rate than the Gen Con win rate, because so few people played the Vanguards in the Gen Con tournament. Vice versa, we check the Summoner War Zone, we can see there's very few matches for the Cave Goblins in the faction ranking. So when we go over to here, the Cave Goblins total win rate is closer to their Gen Con win rate than any other faction, which all had over 100 games in the Summoner War Zone. 166, 112, 106, and then 54 for the Cave Goblins. We can also, and so this allows us to analyze a couple things. One, just statistically, who wins the most? Surprisingly, the Phoenix Elves, taking it over what's commonly considered to be the best deck in the game, the Polar Dwarves, and taking over it with the title the Polar Dwarves took from the Savanna Elves. I thought this was really interesting, and I was really confused by it, because when I played the Phoenix Elves, they felt powerful, but not as powerful or as debilitating as the Polar Dwarves and the Savanna Elves could be. So I went back and I took a look at the Phoenix Elves faction ranking, and I think we might see why. The Phoenix Elves' only 2 matchups are against the Tundra Orcs and the Vanguards. Now, the way the Summoner Wars League works is it's mirror matches every week. So you have 2 games, you play one at, it's the same faction, we'll say Phoenix Elves versus Tundra Orcs, and you'll play 2 games against the same opponent. One game you'll play as the Phoenix Elves, the other game you'll play as the Tundra Orcs. And so you get a lot of these practice with these same matchups, and we can get these good data points. But the problem is that the Phoenix Elves data is now skewed, because it only evaluates them against the Tundra Orcs and the Vanguards. And we can learn some interesting things from stuff like this. Like, we can learn the Vanguards really struggle against the Phoenix Elves and the Savanna Elves, but do a lot better against the Fallen Kingdom. And once we have all these factions, we can compare it to the overall, see if like what matchups stand out. But I think the Phoenix Elves facing what are considered by league and total win rate, the Vanguards is the worst faction. By Gen Con win rate, the Tundra Orcs are the worst faction. So the fact that the Phoenix Elves only faced those 2 factions in the league, and not any of these like middle tier factions or high tier factions, might have pushed their numbers above those of the commonly considered top tiers. And so I wouldn't use this data to say that the Phoenix Elves are better than the Polar Dwarves, only that it is notable that they have the top win rate at this point. And while we're taking a look at the Phoenix Elves, while we're taking a look at all the data, we might as well take a look at the matchups for each of these factions at Summoner Wars Zone. You saw the Phoenix Elves absolutely crush their competition, a massive win against the Vanguards, but only a 51.9% win against the Tundra Orcs. So this matchup, even if the Phoenix Elves are considered a lot better than the Tundra Orcs, this matchup seems pretty even. Whether that's a small sample size thing or whether it's the Phoenix Elves versus Vanguards matchup is just really crushing to the Vanguards, remains to be determined, but that's something that the statistics can bring up. I think that the matchup is just really rough for the Vanguards because the Phoenix Elves have so much range, so much like engaged shenanigans. And the Vanguards have very little assassination ability that I can tell. And so Moldaria can just hit, and win the economy battle against Sarah, when the economy battle is what Sarah usually uses to win against anybody else. Meanwhile, in the Phoenix Elves versus the Tundra Orcs matchup, the Tundra Orcs have that rush, that 4 glory attack, and it puts a lot more pressure on Moldaria than the Vanguards can put on Moldaria. So that's my theory. Let's take a look at the other stats. The second place, we got the Polar Dwarves. And we can see they face the Tundra Orcs and the Breakers, with pretty handy wins on both. 61.7 against the Tundra Orcs, 65.2 against the Breakers. While I'm just highlighting everything here, Alt left arrow, I'm going to start using that. We can go with the Savanna Elves, the top tier. They only face the Tundra Orcs and the Vanguards. So what I was saying, the advice I was giving for the Phoenix Elves actually would happen to the Savanna Elves as well, facing the bottom tiers. 61 and 68, much more even. This paints a picture of the Phoenix Elves genuinely being better than the Savanna Elves because they had the same matchups in the league. They had roughly the same ability to fight in the GenCon tournament, since that was all random non-mirror matches. And the Phoenix Elves just had much better stats. So that's really notable. Cave Goblins only have one matchup against the Breakers, which they won. The Breakers probably, I haven't analyzed these in depth, but people may be sleeping on the Cave Goblins considering how well they did in the second and third round and the fact that they're in the top half statistically. In the Fallen Kingdom, how do they do? 55.8 against the Vanguards, struggled a little bit more against the Breakers, 46.7. How about the Breakers? We keep mentioning them. Crushed by the Polar Dwarves, lose to the Cave Goblins, but have that winning matchup against the Fallen Kingdom, 53.3%. They did really badly in this league, but did much, much better in the GenCon tournament, as I said, being the strongest there. So maybe their best matchup are just not against these decks. Maybe they really do well against someone like the Savanna Elves because they can use the boost against them. Maybe they do really well against someone like the Phoenix Elves because they can mind control an ability and attack Moldaria with it. I'm not sure, but that's part of the fun of this league, is you get to find this stuff out. Tundra Orcs barely lose to the Phoenix Elves, but then get crushed by the two traditional top tiers, Polar Dwarves and Savanna Elves. And the Vanguards, as we've gone over already, lose. Two of these being, this one in particular is Vanguards versus Phoenix Elves matchup, being the worst in the game. So that's the this faction rankings here. And seeing how they correspond to the GenCon, we see that the factions that did well tend to be the ones that did well. Phoenix Elves do well, Tundra Orcs do poorly, Fallen Kingdom in the middle, Cave Goblins above average, Polar Dwarves above average. I think that the biggest difference between these data sets is in the GenCon tournament, you got to pick what factions you wanted to play. And so if you didn't really like a faction, you didn't have to pick them. I think that really benefited the Breakers, who have this weird mind control, like, I'm not sure how to say it, but they have to make decisions differently. They're a deck that seems passive and defensive, but might have one of the most aggressive summoners in the game because you need your summoner in the thick of things for mind control. They have Wind Mage shenanigans, which I completely ignored when I first saw the deck, thinking they were the weakest common unit in the deck. I was wrong. And stuff like that. Phoenix Elves might have also benefited from that because they're hit and run, and that's not everybody's taste. But Phoenix Elves just have really good statistics across the board. Same thing with Savanna Elves. Savanna Elves, and then you might say decks like Savanna Elves and Polar Dwarfs would suffer because they have the perception of being powerful from like scouting, from people's anecdotal evidence, from Ice Ram, Glacial Shift, and Chant of Powering Makenda Rue to do 13 damage in one turn with one unit. But I'm not sure. I think that supposed power would affect both weak and strong players choosing which decks to pick. There's no excuse for the Tundra Orcs here. They struggled. Maybe people just liked hitting things. I don't know. But this is what I'd like to present. The statistics from every official match list the Phoenix Elves as being the most powerful deck. And when we look in depth at the matches, it at least shows evidence that they're above the Savanna Elves, if not the Polar Dwarves. I don't think they're above the Polar Dwarves, but I think the Savanna Elves might have been a bit overrated at first, which makes me happy because they're my favorite deck to play, and I like being able to win with them and be like, I won because of me, not because the deck is super powerful. Anyway, that's the data here. So I said that I would talk about the GenCon formula and then the statistics and then my personal background. So I've been playing Summoner Wars since it came out in, well, 1 year. It came out in 2009. I started playing in 2010. I was 10 years old at that point, and I joined the Summoner Wars forum in 2011 when I was 11. And it was a really important, really wonderful experience for me. It was the first chance I got to pretend to be an adult and to be taken seriously and respected and listened to by other adults, or at least people I thought were also adults. That was really rare for me as a kid. I had a really easy childhood, but part of that is like, getting shuttled from place to place. And so having a place to just relax and talk about a board game was really nice and really helpful and makes this game extremely important to me beyond just being a really fun, really strategically deep board game. I went on that forum by the name of Zebulon because that was the school play character that I had in Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I had my little avatars in Meaty Mumway. I'd play Mafia games. I remember once it was spring break, and I didn't realize that the games are supposed to be played over weeks, so I just kept commenting every half hour, and it was, again, just really good memories. A lot of the names I see on the Discord, Water D, Killer Cactus, are names I recognize from back in the day. And now that I'm an adult, going to college, getting a degree in the field statistics that I was just talking about, I just want to say that I'm really thankful for everybody who's watching this, and I hope you get as much joy from this game as I do, because it's awesome. Thanks to Colby, thanks to the people who play this game with me, thanks to my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day.